It was last January when I decided to take a week off from work after the new year. I was hoping that by then, everyone else would be back at work, leaving me with some peace and quiet. My plans were simple: do some shopping around town and mostly relax at my apartment by myself. On this particular day, I had been out driving around in the snow, picking up a few things from stores, and then I made my way back to the apartment. It was around 7 p.m. when I finally stepped inside. I stripped off my coat, took a deep breath, and cooled off. After a long day out of the house, I felt drained. I grabbed some snacks and sank into the couch. I flipped on the TV, letting myself relax. Slowly, my eyes began to droop as I drifted in and out of sleep. But then, at around 8:30, the PA system buzzed. The sharp, sudden noise echoed through the apartment, cutting through the quiet. Someone was outside, wanting to be let into the building. I had no plans for anyone to visit, so I had no idea who it was. The buzzer sounded again, and I reluctantly got up. I walked over to the window that faced the front of the building. I didn't want to raise the blinds too much, just enough to get a glimpse of who was at the door. The figure outside was a large man, silhouetted against the snowy night. It was dark, but I could tell he was older, mid-40s maybe. The problem was, I didn't recognize him. There were only 3 other people living in the complex at the time, and I was familiar with all of them. This man wasn't one of them. If he were visiting someone, surely they would have let him in. He had to be a stranger. I walked back to the PA system, pressed the mute button, and then sat back down on the couch. I tried not to think about it. I even dozed off a few more times during the next hour. Eventually, I turned off the TV and decided to head to bed. By then, it must have been around 10 p.m. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I drifted off into a deep sleep. But several hours later, I was jolted awake by a loud thud, the kind of noise that rattled the entire apartment. My heart skipped a beat as I lay frozen in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the door. For a few seconds, everything was eerily quiet. Then, nothing. It was like the noise had never happened. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I slowly sat up. What was that? What the hell was going on? I listened intently, but all I could hear was the faint creaking of the old building. I got out of bed, my mind racing. My feet felt heavy as I moved toward the door, my breath shallow. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to listen. There was nothing. No sounds, no footsteps, nothing but the silence of the apartment. I hesitated, then slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open just a few inches. I peered out into the dim living room. Everything appeared normal except for one thing. The door to my apartment was wide open. My stomach twisted into a knot as a wave of cold dread washed over me. My legs went weak. The door, how could it be open? I never left it like that. I couldn't breathe as I stared at the open doorway. It didn't make sense. I stepped back, retreating into the shadows of my room. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. But then, my gaze caught something that made my blood run cold. A huge dent in the wood of my bedroom door, right by the knob. I froze, my skin crawling. The dent was fresh. It wasn't there when I went to bed. The thud, that had to be the sound of the door being hit. But why? What had happened? I didn't wait to find out. Without thinking, I sprinted back to the room and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone, dialing 911. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest as I huddled in the corner of my closet, terrified that whoever had broken in was still in the apartment, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to find me. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. But nothing happened. The apartment remained silent. No footsteps, no strange noises. Whoever had been here, whoever had come into my apartment, was gone. When the police finally arrived, they couldn't find any signs of forced entry beyond the dent in my door. They checked the apartment top to bottom, but there was no trace of the intruder. What they did tell me was that the man had tried buzzing the other apartments first. They assumed that someone had let him in. But why had he come for me? What did he want? They speculated that he might have thought the apartment was empty when he tried to break in, but that didn't explain the strange behavior. The dent in the door, just one single strike, wasn't an attempt to break it down. It seemed like something done out of frustration, like he had been stopped and then just left. I still live in the same apartment, but nothing else has happened. Who the man was and what he wanted remains a mystery. Every time I hear a noise late at night, I can't help but wonder if it's him coming back. The silence of the apartment, once so comforting, now feels suffocating, heavy with the question of what could have happened that night and what might still be lurking in the shadows. I've been working at a warehouse for 4 years now. Compared to others, it's really small. From the outside, you'd probably never even guess it was a warehouse. It's owned by a small tech company that only moves its own products, so there's no need for a large building. My coworker Seth and I were the two main overnight workers, taking turns on the night shifts, though we almost never worked together. The night shift worker always had to fly solo. The main job for the overnight guy was to fill out paperwork, inventory counts, shipment confirmations, and the like, so it wasn't really a multiple-person job anyway. But one night, while I was filling out these papers in the back room, I heard a knock echo through the front of the building. It was strange, considering the place was so quiet at night. I set down my pen and walked to the front. When I reached the entrance, I saw a man standing outside, his hands above his eyes, pressing his face against the glass door like he was trying to peer inside. I froze for a moment, not sure what to make of it. I slowly walked closer to the door, and once he noticed me, he moved his face back from the glass and knocked again, this time harder, trying to get my attention. His hands grabbed the door handle and he shook it violently, as if desperate to get in. I felt a rush of unease. "Hey!" I called out, trying to stay calm. "You need to leave. The doors aren't open to the public." He just stared at me through the glass, his face cold and unreadable. After a long moment, he calmly walked away, without saying a word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the night, unsure of what to think. Maybe it was just some drunk guy, I told myself, but the whole thing felt off. Still, I didn't let it bother me too much. I went back to my paperwork and tried to push the strange encounter from my mind. The next night, it happened again. I was in the back room filling out more forms when I heard those same knocks. Louder this time. My heart skipped a beat as I walked to the front entrance. Sure enough, there he was, the same man, pressing his face against the glass, knocking urgently at the door. He started yelling for me to open it. His voice was hoarse, almost frantic. I could feel my stomach tighten. "You need to leave now," I said firmly, trying to sound as authoritative as I could. "If you come back here again, I'll call the cops." His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I thought he might do something unpredictable. But after a tense pause, he turned around and quickly walked away, vanishing into the dark. For a while after that, the man didn't return. The weeks passed, and I mentioned the strange visitor to some of the day workers. They'd never seen the guy before, so I figured he was just some random person who'd gotten confused. But even then, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then one night, while I was working the forklift, I heard something by the back of the building. It was a thud, a sound that seemed to come from outside. I paused, trying to figure out if it was something that had fallen or if maybe something was wrong. I turned off the lift and walked to the back, but everything looked fine. Nothing had fallen over, nothing was out of place. I walked further down the back wall, and that's when I noticed the back door. My mind immediately went to the man who had been outside before. Maybe he had returned, I thought. Maybe he was at this door instead. This one wasn't made of glass, and it had no windows, so I had no way of knowing what was on the other side. I checked the door. It was locked, but that didn't ease the strange feeling creeping up my spine. Something wasn't right. I was tempted to open it to see what was out there, but I knew better than to do that. I had learned over the years to trust my instincts when something felt off. I went back to my work, trying to ignore the feeling of unease gnawing at me. But then I heard it again. The same thud, from the same direction. My heart raced. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I walked back to the door, checked it again, but it was still locked. Inside, everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there. Something hidden, something waiting. Then an idea came to me. Maybe checking the security cameras could ease my mind. I knew I wasn't supposed to do that, but I felt I had no choice. My manager always warned us never to mess with the cameras, but this was different. I needed to know what was going on. It took me a few minutes to find the right footage, but when I did, I felt a chill run down my spine. The camera showed the same man from the previous nights, but this time he wasn't at the front door. He was standing at the back door, leaning against it with his ear pressed against the door. It was like he was listening for me, waiting for me to open it. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but as soon as I put the phone down, the man turned and walked away, as though he had known what I was doing. The next 2 days were a blur of reviewing old footage. We went through the past 2 weeks of recordings, and to my horror, we discovered something that made my blood run cold. After the 2 times I had told him to leave from the front door, the man continued to show up at the building every single night. Every night, without fail, he stood by the back door, leaning against it, listening, waiting. I had no idea how he knew when I was there. The whole thing was incredibly creepy. The thought that he had been there every night, silently watching, without me even knowing, made my skin crawl. We called the cops, but even with their patrols outside, the man never showed up again. He disappeared as mysteriously as he had come, but I still think about him sometimes. I don't know what he wanted or why he kept coming back, but the thought that he could still be out there, watching, makes it hard to shake the feeling that he'll return. And if he does, I'm not sure I'll be able to stop him. It was a Friday night back in 2018. I was working at home on a paper I needed to finish for work and was trying to get it done, so I could enjoy my weekend without having to worry about it. It was probably somewhere around 10 p.m. at this point, but I'd been working in my office for a good 3 hours. This was after a full day already, too, so I was getting pretty exhausted. I kept finding myself getting distracted or losing focus, so I paused what I was doing and stood up to stretch my legs, hoping to wake myself up. I paced around the room a bit, but as I passed by the wall opposite my desk, I noticed something move in the window. I stopped and did a double take, looking out the window again. I was on the second story of my house, and the window had a view of the front portion of the property, near the garage and porch. At first, I didn't see anything and thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then I saw a bit of movement again. It was a shadow hovering over the sidewalk leading up to the porch. Someone was standing outside the front door, or at least that's what it looked like from the shadow. I stared out the window for a couple of minutes, watching the shadow barely move. I wasn't sure what to think. Was it just someone walking by? Or was it something more? After a few moments, I decided to leave my office and go downstairs. I leaned on the front door and looked through the peephole. There, standing motionless in front of the door, was a man. He appeared to be about 40 years old, bald, with a scruffy gray beard. I watched him for a moment. He didn't knock or ring the doorbell or make any noise at all. He just stood there. What started freaking me out more was that I didn't know how long he had been there. I had been working for hours, and I hadn't noticed him until just a few minutes ago. Wanting some answers to why the man was standing there, I opened the door. As soon as I did, I was taken aback. The man didn't even flinch. His face stayed the same, cold, emotionless, and almost expressionless. "What are you doing here?" I said, my voice stern. The man continued to stare at me but didn't answer. Then, to my confusion, his eyes slowly moved past me and looked down the hallway in my home. I instinctively moved the door further toward my body to block his view. "I don't know why you're here, but you need to leave," I said firmly, closing the door quickly. His strange behavior was both creepy and aggravating. His complete disregard for me and the fact that he just stood there, unbothered, made me feel uneasy. But then, to my relief, I heard his footsteps walking away from the porch. I quickly checked to make sure he was gone, then went back upstairs to my office, trying to shake off the encounter and focus on my work. About 5 minutes later, just as I was beginning to get back into the rhythm of my paper, a sudden knock echoed through the house. It was from the front door, but these knocks weren't light. They were loud, like someone banging on the door with their whole fist. Irritated, I jumped up and quickly ran downstairs, swinging the door open aggressively with the intent to yell at the man. But as soon as I saw him, I immediately changed my mind. Something about the look in his eyes and the way he was standing instantly shifted my anger into fear. I looked down at his hands, noticing he was holding something to his side, like he was trying to conceal it from me. All I could make out was the top of a small handle, resembling that of a knife. My heart sank. I looked back up at him, only to see his whole body jolt toward me. Without thinking, I jumped back and slammed the door shut. I struggled to lock it, my hands shaking. On the other side of the door, I could hear the man trying to turn the handle, his strength testing the lock. Once I managed to get the bolt lock in place, the man started banging on the door again, harder this time. The violent thuds shook the door, and my adrenaline surged. After several seconds, the banging stopped, and I could hear footsteps retreating. My breath was ragged, my body trembling from the sudden rush of fear. I stood there for a moment trying to collect myself before I shakily went back upstairs to my office and called 911. The police never found the man, and no real answers were ever given about what happened that night. But I'll never forget the look in his eyes or the feeling that he was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a mistake.